I am happy to introduce to this crowd for the first time Phil Beisel,
Sir.
and I'm not even sure I put the syllable what do you call it, the emphasis on the right
Emphasis.
syllable.
I think you got it right.
I got it right. Okay, Phil. Phil has an interesting background, and the most interesting part about his background is that he's really, really close to CERN Basher. And so that alone would have caused me to want to have him potentially come on the show. Phil, my understanding is you've worked at a couple of tech companies, little guys, Apple, more recently, some car company, Rivian. And those two things alone, again, in addition to the CERN Basher connection, uh, you might have something to talk to us about.
I might. I write a lot. I don't know how good it comes out my mouth, but we'll see.
All right. Okay. Well, you, of course, have a fairly big presence on X, write a lot of articles for X,
Yeah.
long, detailed, deep articles on X. And you, uh, uh, in a couple of those articles, I read a couple of those articles, and that's actually, why I picked up the DM and said, "Hey, maybe you come on the show."
Yeah.
So I'd like to start exactly where I've left off pretty much all this week. I think it is the most important topic. And so while I might be doing it to death, and maybe the audience is even getting a little tired of it, I I'm not sure that we should ever get tired of it. So this morning we've got Ashok saying that version 13 of FSD is going to be unsupervised, and I believe that's the first we've heard of that. What thought you, because you did post it, what went through your mind when you saw that particular posting?
Well, I think it's very consequential. I mean, it's basically suggesting that Tesla is getting very confident in what it's doing. I think one of the thoughts that I have here is that Tesla's probably internally 6 months ahead of where we are on its versions. And I think that partially the reason that We Robot came about is because Elon probably saw where they were at that time in April or so, I'm guessing. I mean, I'm not sure.
Mhm.
But I mean, clearly what happens is these releases come about, the 12.x releases come about, and they're tested and regression tested and so forth. But I mean, when are they cooked? They're cooked months earlier, potentially. While I might question the intelligence of calling something version 13, yeah, maybe that's kind of clever too in a way, right? Where do we come from? We came from the 11 stack, which was part algorithmic code based in the planning side of it. And we moved into kind of a full AI model in 12. I think what separates us, the 13 from the 12, is largely that it's ostensibly made to be an unsupervised version. Um, I believe there's probably a lot of stuff hanging in the 12 version that relates to supervision, and if they've done it right, version 13 can accommodate both a supervised state and an unsupervised state. And in fact, I think as version 13 is released onto our cars, of course, right away will be supervised, right? We'll still supervise it, but I think as the head of FSD said, it is meant to be feature complete or
Mhm.
unsupervised. And I believe that 13, some version of 13 was running around Robot
Right.
cars. So, I mean, what's interesting about this, Randy, is that if you look at each version gets remarkably better, right? And there's a lot of people that say that like maybe it's like a half step to the door, you never quite get there. Um, but you do get there. You make such progress that I mean, obviously, I think the thing about um, the problem about autonomous driving is that the tail is very, very long. Like it's extremely long. The conditions that can be met, can be encountered on the road are seemingly never ending. And you could see that, think about that as you go drive. You're like, oh my God, that this intersection, this situation, um, and so like each version sort of, I'm not saying it suggestly, it's really kind of like knocking off that tail, but it sort of is,
Yeah.
right? It's continually walking forward. Like you saw the notes on 13 was okay, for the first time, we're going to be able to deal with police sirens, fire sirens, have a different input modality other than vision.
Mhm.
Uh, it's unclear if they've ever used audio as an input, but they're certainly signaling they are, and they think that's an important thing. So yeah, I think what we have with 13 is the potential for unsupervised. And if they make the same level of progress that they have made in the last year on 12, then it's hard for me to believe that within 8 months to 12 months from now, we're not fully unsupervised. I mean,
Will we have a, what they, I guess they call it level 4 version? Would you think we'll go through level 4 where you're able to talk, text, fiddle with your games or whatever, but the system could come on and warn you that you need to take over, and you get 5 seconds to take over? I mean, is that a possibility that we'd have a level 4 before we have a level 5?
I don't know. I think in a sense that they're just, I actually don't think that that terminology is used much inside Tesla.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know that. I'm
Yeah.
just saying I don't think it is. I think they're just looking for, going level 5, going for broke. I mean, it's the problem is that if you're supervising driving, you really have to be supervising the driving. Like you can't do a set of things that suddenly, oh, you have, because the human can't react quick enough to the circumstance that the car needs you to react to.
Mhm, mhm.
So it's sort of like a very funny, I don't know, it's like a step function where you're in a situation where um the car's decision framework for, say, something like a catastrophic accident or something, the human can't react to that. I mean,
Well, yeah, but what about situations like I drove up to a McDonald's the other day and I was going to let it go through the drive-through itself. And it got
yeah, well,
and it got to the split and it sat there and it went,
yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting question. There's some, one of the things that in my neighborhood, turns out I live in a pretty large gated community. And so I own a recent Model 3 Performance. And of course, I use FSD a lot, maybe 50% of my driving, maybe more actually, if I think about it. And in fact, what's cool about it is it's become natural. Like at first, it's like, oh, it's a cool thing to test and have fun. And now it's sort of like, well, I just want to use it to get places because I actually don't really want to drive that much as I think I do. But one of the things in my neighborhood, because it's gated, is the gate's quite specific. The left side of the gate is it's a 2-lane entrance, and there's 2 gates, and the left side goes to a guardhouse where you have to check in if you're a guest. The right side has got a tag on your car that automatically opens. And FSD, is really at this point, built. There's no personal user preferences built into it, right?
right,
So all you have right now is like complete aggregation. It doesn't know my car can go into the right lane versus the left. It
exactly.
does know to stop at the gate. Like if
Mhm,
the gate comes down, it actually stops.
mhm.
But it does get into that, and I think what you're saying is it kind of stutter.
Yeah,
It doesn't quite know what to do, and then that's where I always intervene.
yeah.
So I think that's sort of what I was talking about before, is that there's an extremely long tail here of unique situations, and some of those jump into your situations,
Right,
like something specific, like my gate problem is my gate problem. It doesn't know my car.
right.
Like if you came to the same back gate, you'd have to go, visit me. You'd have to go through the guest entrance, right?
Exactly. Even if it was the same car. Well, no, because
No, not the same. Yeah, right, right. Yeah, if you stole my car. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, it's a great question of how if you see with 13, I even noted that it said something about garage parking,
Yeah,
which to me is a kind of my holy grail. Like
sure, sure.
you park that thing in my garage, I'm I'm pretty happy. Um, but yeah, it tends to have like the edges of the last small segment of your drive. It gives up, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I don't think 12 has any reverse in it, to my knowledge. Although the smart summons does have reverse, right? So yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I feel like Tesla's really just calling it, saying we're going level 5, and all those other things, um, get dealt with. They're different. Some of them are just different. They're not really defined as those level 3, 4, 5 things. They're more like how does it handle a situation?
Yeah.
You know.
So you wrote the other day, and I didn't read it in great depth because it's a little over my head, but I thought maybe we'd take off on that subject for just a second. Maybe you could make me understand. Even Brian Wang sometimes gets me to understand what he's talking about. So there's a chance, there's a hope. Anyway, you're talking about that the current large language model approach, the LLMs, is not the final level. That there's a way that things will compute in the future that's at an even greater or different methodology. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, well, I mean, point out I'm not really the expert on AI. I'm kind of an amateur at it to in a certain respect. But I mean, here's where we are. We have uh, AI has progressed in a sense of we're machine learning, and we progressed to really learn how to build neural networks, right? I mean, uh, that's kind of what's happened, and the accelerated computing stack has helped us do that. And large language models are unique, but also kind of confined to a certain extent to language. And language, the written word is it's not that big. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of things written on planet Earth. They're mostly historical, right? We put something there because we're talking about something that um, has happened from a knowledge point of view.
Right.
Um, and what I was trying to get across was that if you look at something like FSD and you look at it as the prototype kind of stack for Optimus, and you look at what Optimus is going to do in the world, it's going to spend an enormous amount of time bringing information from its vision, right? From its cameras, its eyes. And so what I was trying to articulate there is that where learning I see, you look at Optimus, and if you take a very narrow view of Optimus and you'd say, okay, this thing needs to train like FSD so that it can perform tasks, you know. But I think it's a little bit more, eventually what happens is it gets more into a cycle, and that it actually, its its interactions with the world visually becomes information. I mean, it's information. Like we gather as humans, we probably gather, there's probably a lot in our DNA, and then a lot is learned through experience. And if you take all 5 senses, most of the experience that we gather is visually.
Mhm.
So if you take Optimus and you throw it out in the world and it's going to encounter situations, it's also going to encounter the physics of the world and the interactions between humans and animals and things and static things. And from that, I think it's a feedback loop. And
Yeah.
whether that data goes back, the way we look at it today, right, is we look at like full self-driving is kind of what I would call a asymmetric model, right? It's the training and the inference component, right? So, the car gathers an enormous amount of visual data, sends it back to the cloud. It goes back through, trains, builds a new model. The model gets pushed to the car. The car, through what we call inference, operates and makes decisions. Um, but exercises the model,
Right.
right? But I think if you can tighten that feedback loop, you can tighten that loop, and you could say that maybe it doesn't. Maybe Optimus is gets some kind of onboard training
Mhm.
and uses that visual data to learn itself, and maybe it's computing portion of a model and it's pushing it back. I mean, ultimately, one thing that's interesting about FSD is that what we get out of it is it's an aggregate summation. It's just an aggregation of all let's call it good experience um, driving scenarios, right? Like your car, as we were talking earlier, your car doesn't end up having a certain um, way it operates because of what it's doing in your neighborhood, right? It's
Everybody.
it's an aggregation, right? And so if you take an Optimus bot running around, it's different than a human in that, like you and me, we have different experiences, so we would approach certain problems differently, and we might know how to use that espresso machine or know how to use that lamp because we've encountered it before. Um, but in a sense, what you've got going on with Optimus is the ability to potentially learn as an individual, sort of like a human does, but then push it back to the fleet.
Right, right,
Just
right.
really, I mean, that's kind of stunning, right? We don't do that like
Oh,
in
yeah,
the
no, it's
in,
that.
in the in the human set, the human fleet. We don't do that. I mean, the only way we do is, like, let's say you know a lot about something, you write a book or you write an article, and then I read that article. I learn from you, but my wife doesn't just learn
Right.
that, right? It's not pushed down into her brain. Um, yeah. So
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Okay, so that causes me to want to know something I wrote down very early in my thinking about this conversation. So you were at Rivian, you were at the highest levels, you're personal friends with the CEO. You were there long enough to get the culture and to see how people think. And I'm not looking for you to divulge anything that you shouldn't divulge, or I'm not out to attack Rivian in any way. I would think that the number one question that all of us in the Tesla community have for those who are in other car companies is, why hasn't a single car company, not Rivian, not Ford, not General Motors, not Volkswagen, not Toyota, I mean, none of them. Why have none of these companies come to Tesla to look at some of the tech that they don't have and that is far ahead of the tech that they do have? Like even one of the earliest examples, of course, was the octavalve, and then you've got this new electrical system, the 48 volt. But FSD is the one that we all think of
right,
first.
right, right, right.
Nobody that we know of. Now, maybe there's conversations, maybe there's talks, but so far there's no licensing, there's no purchases of OEM products, and yet the car industry has been buying and selling amongst themselves for decades and decades and decades. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Well, I mean, I certainly make some comments about legacy auto. I really don't think legacy gets this problem very well. Our friends in Detroit, I don't think really have a future in the technology side, which is the future of automotive. I mean, it's hard to separate this anymore. It's become closer and closer to a consumer electronic device. I mean, you don't show up in suburban Detroit and expect it to feel like Silicon Valley, and it doesn't. I have enormous experience with that because that's how Rivian, when I was at Rivian, I think I was 60th of ish employee, 2017. And I was hired to do the technology side, the technology stack, software defined architecture, what we call this. Um, the company was situated in suburban Detroit. And while there are great people there, great automotive engineers, they're not technology folks. And conversely, people here are not automotive folks. So I think going back to your question, I think there's right now I think there's a bit of a wait and see on Tesla, to frank. I mean, I think people that are deep into it recognize that FSD 12 is a significant breakthrough. I mean, not a minor, but a significant. game-changing breakthrough. But I don't think legacy views the world that way. That's not the lens that they look through. It's a little bit more incremental. I remember how, I mean, you know this, but um, for the audience, most of what Detroit does is work with suppliers to integrate parts. And if you look at like the technology of the car, like when we started at Rivian, the technology of the car is literally like the brains, the heart, and the blood vessels, and that whole component. But if you talk to more traditional auto, they'd say, well, okay, your team's the infotainment team. It's this little thing. We can go buy it from Bosch or Continental or somebody, and we can just put it in the car,
Right.
just like we buy a steering wheel or we buy door handles or and so on one hand, you would think, oh, that makes sense. They could license this stuff wholesale because they're used to talking. They would talk to Tesla as if it were a supplier. But I think you got to get your arms around the fact that it's a very complex supplied component. And I don't think that, the folks there yet in legacy understand um, how to swallow that component. Like they're not technology people. I've had enough experience with them working, at Rivian at times. We talked to Ford, we talked to General Motors. Um, and it's just a different world. It's a different universe. And when you get there and you actually sit in a conference room and talk to them, you realize how different they view technology.
Mm,
It's very different. And so I think with FSD, there's some very, very smart people that are probably sitting recommending to their executives to look at it. I think the executives are sort of sitting on the bench a bit, thinking, maybe our team, I think another thing that I would point out is that a lot of companies have teams that, there's a survival strategy, a survival kind of instinct for every team. And every good team should have that instinct in a company, right? And so I'm sure there's a team inside of General Motors that says, don't worry about it, we've got this. Um, and we'll get there. And then they're probably looking at Tesla going, I'm not sure how we're going to get there. But that's what they're probably pushing up stairs to their management.
mhm.
So I mean, it's a combination of stuff. And I think the other thing is that maybe Jeff Lutz would be more the right person to talk about this, but it's probably a reasonable pill to swallow like licenses is going to cost money and it's hardware too, right? It's not just a piece of software you put in the car. You have to um, have a pretty substantial board, the inference board,
Mhm.
and I wouldn't know what that would cost, but I'm sure that at the end of the day, it's probably going to add 2 grand or more to the cost of goods of a vehicle. I mean, I don't know. I'm just throwing
Yeah.
it out there. I think Rivian might be a little bit different in this regard. I think that Rivian um, probably aspires to be somewhat equal in the tech stack to um, to Tesla. I mean, the in full tech stack. I mean, we're not just talking um, FSD. I mean, that's the hard one, and that's the one we talk about a lot. But we have to recognize that the car has an enormous amount of software in it from a controls point of view and all the way up through the user interface. And if you look at the current user interface and you listen to some of the executives at Rivian speak about it, it's pretty refined. It's very refined. I mean, I own both cars, and so I contrast them, and I love both companies. So I don't like I have a view of this where I can drive the Rivian and I go, this is really aesthetically well done. Um, from a the UX UI is very clean, and I know what's under it, and I know how they've moved that forward, and I think that they're probably going for it in their own way with their own full self-driving. I mean, publicly they've spoken about a ramp to ramp experience, so probably they're talking more about the 90% of miles are highway miles done from ramp to ramp.
Mm.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean,
Oh,
I
yeah,
think, I think when you get into the neighborhood, I mean, that's where the problems get hard too.
sure, sure,
Um,
sure.
so, but I think, in the case of Rivian, I think they're trying to aspire towards equals in terms of a total stack. And I think that their game is ultimately licensing their technology as they've done this deal with VW and so forth, right? Um, I'm not in the minds of how they view this at the moment. And
So if I was to steel man the other side, I would say Tesla already has the inference chip. They're making it in the millions.
right,
With the Optimus coming on, they're going to be making it in the millions and millions, the tens of
right,
millions.
exactly, exactly.
So the cost of that inference chip, first of all, they would have, because they're known to be lean, mean in terms of manufacturing. I'm sure they've gotten a lot of the cost out of that chip. We know that it's a very low wattage compared to what it might be if it
Mhm.
wasn't well designed. We know that it's got, more not more understanding now of the world because of the backup of, Colossus. No, not Colossus. I can't keep all the names straight anymore. The massive amount of compute that they now have in South Texas. I'm in Texas at the south end. What do they call that one? Cyclops? No. What's it?
No, I think it is Colossus, right? Or is Colossus the one in Memphis for XAI?
I think that's Memphis. But anyway,
It,
so
we,
they have the data. Tesla has the data, they have the compute, they have the hardware stack,
yeah,
all the cameras. They've been testing this for a very, very, very long time, and then they got the chip. How in the world would a company, even like Rivian, who might be more tech oriented, ever have a thought that they could catch up on any one of those five, much less all five, rather than just buy
it's
the chip from Tesla and pay a royalty?
yeah, I think I do think it's a tough hill to climb. I do. But I've been around Rivian for was it around 6 years. The challenges that Rivian has taken on are quite enormous. I mean, if I mean, Rivian came out of nowhere, two vehicle platforms, right? They did the R1, which was called A1 when I was there, and then they named it R1. So that's the first vehicle platform, and then they've announced an R2 and an R3. But they also don't forget they've done the EDV platform. That's the Amazon delivery
Right,
van, which they
right,
make in the thousands. And there's a lot of obviously shared components between these
mhm.
products. But aspirationally, Rivian's always thrown the ball pretty far downfield and went for it. So I don't want to climb in their brains, but I if I were to guess, RJ probably is saying, let's give it a shot. Um, but I don't know. Like
Yeah, yeah.
I can't say like I believe personally on a very personal basis, given my understanding of what Tesla's done, I would agree with almost every point you made. I'd say they built quite a moat,
Yeah.
you know, and part of that moat is the data, the fleet, which is you can't, outside of simulation. In other words, you
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
um, do an enormous amount of simulation. I think Apple's Titan project went that route
Right.
because they only had about 50 test cars at the
Mhm,
time.
mhm.
Um, Outside of simulation, it's hard to catch up to a fleet of 4, 5, 6 million data collecting devices, right?
Yeah.
Um, the compute they're throwing behind it is enormous, absolutely enormous. Whether actually that one's called Colossus or not, I've kind of forgotten. It is a Colossus.
Right.
um, so I mean, even from a supply point of view, like there's only a certain number of companies that have a relationship with NVIDIA where they can buy that much
Right.
compute, even if they had the money, right? I mean, even if you had the money.
Yeah. Yeah. You
Um,
got to spend it on that.
Yeah.
So,
So
okay, so
yes, it's a hard hill to climb.
that's from Rivian's standpoint. And so
Yeah.
I'm actually kind of driving towards something, but let me ask
Mhm.
a question before I get there. Well, then you've got Hyundai, you've got BYD, you've got Volkswagen, who have recently all made deals with other companies in order to get, and some of the companies in China, besides BYD, that have made deals with other companies that are somewhere along the way in terms of coming up with some kind of a full self-driving approach rather than making a deal with Tesla. Again, what are they seeing? What do you think they're seeing that would make them think it's smarter to go with these other options that include much more hardware on the car, et cetera, than and probably a more expensive chip than rather than going with Tesla? Is there a, here's my point, is there a uh, they are going to put us out of business and we don't want to be the one to help them by buying stuff from them? I mean, is there some kind of a, New England Patriots problem there?
I actually think that's part of it to a certain extent, but I mean, not climbing in their brains either. I could say that, it's a situation where I think there's still outside of the Tesla community, I think there's a lot of skepticism on does this solution reach the finish line? Is this the
Vision.
way? Is this the approach that comes to complete autonomy? And I believe it is, okay? But I don't believe everyone thinks that way. I
Right.
certainly can see the skeptics out there. Sometimes the skeptics are silly in their analysis and it's not very technology based, which, I dispose of quite quickly because that's not interesting to me. But I think people look at it and they say, there's a debate about um, using other types of sensors. You hear the LiDAR debate quite often, thinking that, oh, Tesla can't do this with vision alone. Obviously, they've added in 13, they've added the hearing component, the auditory component, but LiDAR is a big thing and radar is a big thing. And they say, people know that radars can see through rain and fog, where visually, I mean, if you've got extreme fog,
Right.
your vision is limited because our vision is limited. Like it's just, so I think there's a lot of skepticism. I mean, I think one bucket is skepticism.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
I think one bucket is a bit of dealing with a competitor that isn't typically known as a supplier.
Right.
And I think that you can extend that a little bit too, because I think there's a lot of nervousness about wanting to deal with Tesla on the basis of a supplier.
Yeah.
Like, because it doesn't have a track history of that. To my knowledge, I don't think it's really supplied any
No,
tech to anyone.
don't think so. That's kind of my point. It's
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can, I think uh, there's a lot of issues there that I mean, I don't know about, right? I mean, is camera placement and type important?
Mhm.
If you look at, say, Rivian's got a set of cameras on the car, can those cameras and their placement points be simply reused? Do you have to retrain on that data? I suspect not, but I don't know the answer to that. So, when a company wants to do this, they have to take that chip, but it's a board.
Mhm.
Um, it costs money, a certain amount. Like I can't say other people would estimate that, but it's always electronics in cars are automotive grade to a certain extent. They're more expensive.
Well, I think Tesla has told us that their cost, I think, on that chip is about $1,000.
Are they talking about the board or the chip?
I'm sorry. See, now you're past my level of
Well, I
understanding.
mean the chip sits on a board, right? It's
Maybe
got
it's
a
the
lot.
combination. Maybe it's the combination.
Yeah, I mean that there's an inference chip there that is a combination of, it's got a neural processing core to it. It's got it's licensed ARM core, right? So it's a CPU and a GPU, if you will. but it's on a chip that has memory. I mean, it's on a board that has memory. It's like it's like putting a MacBook motherboard
Right.
in the car,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I don't know what else they handle on that. To be perfectly honest, I don't know what else they put on that. I don't know if there's a separate completely like in Rivian, there's a at least in the generation one, which I was involved in, there is very separate and distinct systems for what does the autonomy and what does say all the user interface component of the car. And we had names for these things.
Sure.
The autonomy was, I think, the ACM, and the thing that did infotainment, as people would express
Right.
it, it's called the XMM. And then there was there's a board for telematics to do basically everything that relates to Wi-Fi or cellular, et cetera. Um, and when Rivian we got this going, it was really a bit more of architecture by organization to a certain extent. That's you would expect in an early first generation to be teams when their domain experts want to control their own destiny, so they want their own board and to do all that stuff. And then as Rivian went forward and consolidated um, organizationally, that actually condensed down to the number of physical boards. Like Gen 2 is very different architecture.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, you've got 1,000 to X dollars worth of hardware you have to add to the car. You have cameras and maybe placements that you have to add to the car. I mean, Tesla hasn't said much to the community at large. And clearly what I mean by that is they may have private talks with General Motors or Ford or possibly Rivian and talk about this stuff internally, about what is necessary, but they're not really ready to go in the licensing business. I'm pretty sure. I think it's a pretty nascent thought at this point. Like a good thought, but like if you were
Right.
the first, I mean, I think you you would have great first mover advantage.
I would
Like
think.
come on in.
I would think. Holy
Look,
man.
I feel like it probably sounds like I'm hedging a bit on this, but what I'd say is if I was General Motors, I would easily go and license it. I mean, it's a no-brainer, okay? Because they're not going to do it themselves.
Not a chance.
There's no chance on this planet or any other that General Motors or Ford are going to come up with comparable
Right.
solutions given their technical experience um, and yeah, abilities. Let's call it abilities. So yeah, I think at best, and maybe that's already maybe that's happening. For all we know,
Yeah. Maybe.
there's nothing publicly announced, but maybe that's happening. That's what I would do.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Um, you also talked to me in the green room a little bit about your experience with transitioning Tesla employees. I thought that was pretty interesting. So, so you've had experience with people that were leaving Tesla, looking for another job in the same area because they obviously could bring some experience. So what were some of your experiences with that?
well, I mean, R Rivian. When I started, I think, like I said, it was about 60th person, second person hired in the state of California. We had a team here. I think it was about 8 folks, but they were sort of like the outpost team. They came in to set up the outpost and get things going. And it was actually Rivian's strategy team, so it wasn't any tech folks. And then we zoomed from 50, 60, 70 people and nobody in tech to 14,000 people in 5 years. Like, I mean, so we hired a lot of people. and 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 I think Rivian has contracted a bit off of that. But so we hired a lot of Apple people. We hired a lot of people from specifically Apple Car. We hired people from Tesla, from the supercharger group. Specifically, I know more about that because I remember some of the folks that came over.
Sure,
We hired people from other parts of their vehicle division, and that's natural. I mean, completely normal.
sure.
People looking for either greater opportunity, getting let's say a bigger job, something that they once you get locked in a company, there's a sort of slow roll to move up. And
Mhm.
so doing something lateral to a different company often is a good transition. And so we saw a lot of that behavior, people looking for bigger jobs outside. And then we saw people that were just not happy with something that was going on at Tesla, maybe within their local management, et cetera. So, you
Yeah,
know,
I'm just curious because in the
it,
bicycle industry, we had Specialized Bicycle Company, which was kind of the Tesla of the bicycle industry. And the owner of that, or the founder owner of that company, was a hard driver like Elon. We had a lot of people that would leave that company after 3 or 4 years, just burned out. Just
yeah,
yeah, they loved it, and they would talk about it as being specialized university, like people talk about Tesla University. So
yeah,
they loved the experience, they appreciated the opportunity, but they were just burned out. They just couldn't do it anymore. Did you have that kind of
yeah,
folk?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I ran into many people like that. I mean, it's a bit scary to hire folks like that because you know that you're going from one high pressure situation to another.
Yeah,
I mean, Rivian's a pretty high pressure situation, very aspirational, and produced a lot in small amount of time. So, we're mostly looking. I think at the time we're mostly looking for people that had greater career aspirations themselves and
mm,
spoke greatly about how they wanted to achieve more outside, and then they were limited by their group for some particular reason.
right.
But I'd say exits that came from Apple Car, I think that was more about that project was wandering, and people were brought in from, I mean, Apple hired people from, say, Hyundai or somewhere else, and here they are. Some of them transplant to Silicon Valley, move their families, et cetera, to work on this project, and then eventually shut down. So they're pushed out and
Yeah.
looking for something. But prior to that, a lot of the good folks were just like, hey, we can't deal with the wandering approach that
Yeah.
Apple's taking. It's not making sense strategy wise. So yeah, I mean, right, it's a combination of all things, right? I mean, you people for all reasons moving around, and I think it's very healthy for companies to. I don't think people should work at one company too long. They should, yeah, because the culture is going to have a certain effect, and um, you just want to move around a bit. Like it's like living in one place forever is sort of like, well, okay, now you know San Jose, great, um, but don't you want to get to know Riverside or wherever you are? Yeah,
There's a there's a long story behind that.
yeah,
I don't want to insult the Riversideans again, but I lived on the west side of Los Angeles for 30 years and came to Riverside to marry my university sweetheart. Now
oh,
I didn't know her when I was in university. She's a college professor. Okay.
uh-huh.
So I wouldn't have moved from West Los Angeles to Riverside for any other conceivable reason that I can
Well,
come up with.
that's a good in the list of reasons. That's a good reason.
That's a good reason.
Yeah,
But
but
yeah, so once you've lived in West LA, it is very, very hard to contemplate. It's kind of some parts of San Diego. Similarly, it's very hard to think about ever uh, trying anyplace else. So if you were to give Tesla any advice right now, so you worked at Apple. I mean, even Elon, appreciates the Apple story. You worked at Rivian. I think that probably Elon, if he was called and asked, he would say that he sees that company as the one that has the most potential to succeed. What do you think after your experience and watching Tesla very closely now for a few years? What is the if I know we always say, but this is what I do for a living is give Tesla advice, right? So I must be really smart. Wow. Anyway, uh, is there
yeah,
is
yeah.
there something that in particular, causes you to go, wow, how come they don't?
Well, it's funny. I get a little out of my technology domain for a second and talk a little bit about marketing.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, every company has a vibe, and I think Tesla's very much an Elon company. it's his sense of how he approaches the world.
Sure.
And if you take a look at um, something like a Tesla product announcement versus an Apple one, right?
Right.
You know, they're different beasts. Um, and arguably Apple's changed too, right? Apple's gone to this I don't know, I think it's a more antiseptic approach with their videos and
It's really not good. I don't
yeah,
even I don't
it's
even watch them anymore. And it used to be like my Christmas to watch
yeah,
Steve.
I mean, Steve Jobs was pretty magical, right? Honestly, I mean, Steve, I can't imagine Steve wanting to do something that isn't live.
Yeah, right.
And I think they've got into, I think COVID pushed them into the comfort zone of doing recorded presentations because they wouldn't have audiences. And then they're, oh wow, we can make these, and we can edit these things and we can make them very curated. We can make them very antiseptic. We can make them perfect in some version of that. But then it doesn't have that dynamic feel and audience participation. So, but the point I'd make about Tesla is that I do feel like it is a very techy company and could probably move up a bit more into how consumer electronic companies market themselves. I feel like, if you look at some of their things, it just, it's not that, I don't mean from a tech approach like it's overly geeky or something, but I feel like it could use a slightly more marketing handshake with the world.
Hmm.
I think it could have that advantage, or take that advantage, if you will. Um, but again, it's a company by personality to a certain extent. It's a lot of Elon's personality. So it's going to feel that way. And if people love him, they probably listen to me and they go, you're full of it. Don't even talk about this. They're perfect in every possible way. I have mad respect, but the point is that I see that opportunity there to kind of up the marketing game a bit.
Yeah,
Um,
of course, I talk about that all the time. And again, not believing I know more than they do, but the PR department should be much better at what
yeah,
they
the PR department should tackle every criticism much more aggressively.
and also,
Because
but also positive. They could do so many
yeah,
things on the positive
there's
side.
a lot of work that could be done there, I think. And I think, but also my comments, I guess, started with the idea of like if you take We Robot, like in some ways it was excellent and amazing and wow, but it was really an event focused on the participants who were there.
You're
And
right.
if you looked at it externally, you'd be like, what's happening here? And I know that there were some circumstances about they had to cut it short, and there was a couple of things that happened there. But like the presentation, Elon's presentation wasn't like it felt like it got interrupted. The car shows up, and then whatever he's talking about is just it's like I feel I think that if I were to make a guess, and this is making a guess, and I might get hit over the head for this guess, but I feel like uh, Elon, Steve Jobs used to practice these things. He used to go out and go through. I think Elon's got a lot on his plate, surprisingly, and probably flew in there and said, "Okay, what's the script?" And okay, I can run with this. And I think it felt a little bit like he was just, "Okay, I what am I supposed to do next?" And so like it probably if you were there, awesome.
Yeah, yeah, it
You
was.
know,
People I talked to that were there, they loved
yeah,
it.
I could see that. I could see that. People I talked to that were there loved it. But I felt like the external world could have used something that was a little bit more polished.
Oh yeah, you're speaking my language.
Yeah.
On the other side of the coin, I totally get it because I consider myself to be a little tiny Elon as as a serial entrepreneur, as somebody who's always looking for the next bright shiny object and who would never ever ever rehearse a speech before I gave a speech. I've always been ex-temp. I would go to the same
Right.
speak competition and I would get number one in ex-temp and get number zero in terms of the prepared talk. So I get it. I understand why he wants to do it extemp. And but that that's part of who he is. Is there anything on the tech side though? Just maybe wrapping up here because we're getting close to needing because I try to keep these under an hour if at all possible.
Yeah, depends how you define long format, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
You could do a Joe Rogan and go on for,
3 hours.
some
Yeah.
2 or 3 weeks, change clothes between. Um, yeah, from a technology point of view, who am I to give them advice? I mean,
You're in the business. You must.
I hear you, but I think they're doing an outstanding job in really converging on FSD in a way. Like they're starting to push hard and fast, and from a I'm not saying that the tempo is increased. Obviously, I think the tempo is increased inside because of where they're trying to reach and what their goals are right now. But saying like from a customer experience point of view, you're seeing more releases, and it's becoming a thing. I feel like honestly, the UI of the car could use a bit more aesthetic work. I mean, honestly, look at Rivian. It's very clean. It's, I kind of look at it and I go, it's very I don't know how to describe the Tesla experience. It's complete because they've been at it for a while, meaning feature complete, lots of features, lots of apps and things that it does. So it takes like a Rivian years to get to that level of completeness. But the design is very something that probably pleases Elon more than pleases uh,
Could
your
that
average consumer products. Like the Rivian has much more the aesthetic feel of like an iPhone interface, whereas the Tesla's a bit more like the aesthetic of a couple trailing releases of Android, if that's the best way I can look at that.
you think that gets solved when you have a real grok inside, when the experience with speaking to your car is like speaking to a friend? Do you think we'll need all that interface? Will we be doing much with our fingers when we can just say, "Hey, Grok, could you just speed it up a little bit?" Or you're getting a little too close to the curb, or I mean,
Awesome question. I actually think natural voice interface to the car is the future of the car.
okay.
And I believe that Grok will come heavy into the car. And you can imagine that it's probably the primary interface for robotaxi.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
mean, you don't
Right.
imagine an experience where you say, robotaxi, robotaxi shows up, takes me to say San Francisco airport. The airport is about give or take 60 miles from my home,
Mhm.
maybe not that far. I have two options, take 101, take 280. Um, but imagine I get in the car and I just say something like, "So what route are you taking?" "Oh, I'm going to take the 101." And okay, so what's that going to take us? It's 52 minutes. What if we take 280? That would be 54 minutes. Take 280. You just
Yeah,
talk to it quite naturally.
yeah.
And you might say I'm going to Tucson or something and say, "What's the weather in Tucson?" Like I don't need to interface with an app. I wrote a piece on this for Apple. My feeling was that their Apple Intelligence should have come with a very different potential home landing experience in their like the homepage experience. Like right now, it's very app centric, and the
Mhm.
business model's wrapped around that. But if you think about it, why do you need all the apps? At some point, the apps are just doing the heavy lifting for the AI. And how are you interacting with the AI? It's probably by voice,
Right,
right?
right.
So yes, to a certain extent, I think you start to throw a lot of that stuff overboard when you have a natural voice interface. And natural voice interface is the right interface, especially in a car,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because it allows you to interact with the car, even from a driving perspective on a different modality. I mean, if you one of the debates we always had at Rivian was that buttons are interface, and I was always like, look, the future is the touchscreen. And people would come back and say, yeah, but this is an off-road vehicle and you're going to jump up and down, it's hard to
Right.
touch this. And that's completely correct. There's
Right.
nothing wrong about that criticism.
Yes.
And people would say, well, if you understand where the button is, it's easier to kind of just reach out and touch the button without needing to change your visual and move your eyes off the street.
Sure.
And so there's merit to that. Although
Mhm.
I think at the end extent, it's better to have a software defined interface where you can then change it magically all the time with over the air updates. But I think as AI is maturing and as the car tech is maturing, that voice is the absolute natural interface to the car.
Mhm.
And people will ask the same questions like, well, we'd be able to get focus and be able to talk to the car over the rest of the folks in the car or the music. And the answer is yes, of course. Right? I mean, that the AI can filter that pretty pretty well. So yeah, I mean that's the way to go.
Yeah.
But
And
but
I've
it's
been,
still but a visually pleasing interface that has
that's
a little bit
totally fine.
more.
Yes. Right. Right. So, but the other thing I've been saying for months now on the voice interface is that it would also just be cool. I think it would sell vehicles. I think little kids would make mommy buy it just because they could talk to their car.
Talk to their car, yeah.
I mean, it's just a fun thing.
Well, we're gonna be able to talk to Optimus. It's going to be its natural interface, right? I
Yeah,
mean, it's
right.
sort of how it's as Elon says, the CP3O and R2D2 combined.
Right.
It's funny. It's funny those things were separated, by the way, in Star Wars. It's kind of odd. One's the communication wizard and one's what? I mean, I don't know, but yeah, I mean, natural voice has been. Look, when I was at Apple in the early days, I worked on a product called Newton.
Oh,
Okay.
really? Wow, wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry. I'm really sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not. I loved it. I mean, it had its fatal flaw. I
Right.
mean, its Achilles heel was handwriting recognition. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, so the idea behind Newton was that it was like a notepad interface,
Right.
a kind of open interface, and you would write on it, and it would turn your handwriting into, well understood text so it could store it and interpret it and do these things. But the problem is that didn't work well.
Okay.
And today that problem is solved with AI, right? It was done very differently
Sure.
back
Sure.
in the day. It
Sure.
was an algorithmic approach and looking for edges and different types of things to determine a 9 versus a 6 versus an A and a B.
Huh.
But now with a neural net, handwriting recognition is kind of like a box checked.
Yeah.
And if we go back and we think about voice, either input or output, there's two sides of this, right? The input side, you and I talking to something and then interpreting it, and then of course the other side, which is that it's outputting voice that has to sound natural. That's kind of a checkbox too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's and just a few years ago, that was not true.
Mhm.
That was absolutely not true. It was more like voice kind of, you would interact with, say, voice trees on terrible customer service systems. And so, but
Right.
it was,
Right.
but it was very, regimented
Mhm.
on its transition points and what it would do. And it wasn't very good. And how many times have we heard, I didn't understand you say that again? I mean, Siri's at that level. I mean, it's getting out of that box, but it's been that way for a long time,
Right.
right? So, I mean, we're on the precipice of being able to do voice as a natural interface as a summary of what I'm saying,
Exactly.
both input, output. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Should be fun. All right. Well, listen, we're gonna give a quick shout out to CERN Basher for
Good dude.
recommending you.
Yeah, good dude. He's,
And also for people to go back and look at his show yesterday that we did. I will put a card up here.
yeah.
It was his great show where he's talking about his trip up to Calgary and back,
Yep.
and all the adventures that he had along the way, many of which were humorous and fun. And he also gave a lot of the details of how FSD operated during the trip, including one very scary moment, which is worth the price of admission all by itself.
I,
So,
I believe that he did like 98% of his miles on FSD.
yeah, yeah, 98%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
easily.
nothing like taking a road trip with a car to learn its personality, its nuances, did that with the Rivian in the early days. And
Yeah,
I was like, when CERN said he was doing the Calgary round trip, I mean, that's a long round trip from where he lives.
yeah.
I think he did 7,000 miles.
In 10 days,
Yeah.
5 days each. Yeah, 5 days
Yeah,
each.
that's a heavy lift. And so, I mean, there's nothing like that because what do you get to experience? You get to experience the reality of charging on the road. What's that really like? Like, are superchargers good in Montana? Right? You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
like they're great next door here in San Jose. Are they good there? Are they great there? Is the Cybertruck fun, comfortable? Yeah. So
After that many hours in the seat. Yes, and congratulations, by the way, on owning a Model 3 performance. That is the car I would own if I were younger,
it's a
like
good
you.
car.
I
You know,
bet.
though, Randy, I'll tell you something. I mean, the Rivian's about speed-wise the same. I mean, the the newer Rivians are even faster. So I didn't have this upgrade in my brain of like, oh, I just bought a real fast car. I mean, it's kind of weird to say that,
Right,
when it's
right, right,
0 to
right.
60s 2.9.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a great car. It's a great car. I mean, it's for a price point, it's exceptional. I mean, I was a BMW M car owner, and I can't imagine buying a $85,000, $90,000 M3 and then having a $50,000, Model 3 performance going, why would I do that?
Just ripping your face off at
Yeah.
every stop
So
sign.
yeah, good on CERN to do that. And he's a good guy. So anything that CERN says, I listen to for sure.
All right, good. All right. Well, thank you for coming on and sorting some stuff out for us. Appreciate. We'll have to have you back soon. It's been great.
Okay.
And to all of you out there, it's been great talking to you.